The letter arrived sealed with blood-red wax and a plea for help. Margaret Blackwood stared at the cream vellum envelope her landlady had just delivered with the morning tea. The wax seal bore an elaborate crest she didn't recognize, and her name was written in elegant, trembling script, the handwriting of someone desperate or terrified, perhaps both. 3 weeks had passed since the midnight express case, 3 quiet weeks of grading Latin examinations and teaching unruly schoolboys their conjugations. Margaret had almost convinced herself that her brief career as a detective had been an aberration, a single strange night on a train, nothing more. She should have known better. Her hands shook slightly as she broke the seal. Inside, the letter began with words that made her blood run cold. "My brother died 3 nights ago. The police say it was an accident. I know it was murder, and I fear I may be next." Margaret sank into her chair and read the rest with growing concern. It was March 15th, 1895, a grey Edinburgh morning that had seemed ordinary until 30 seconds ago. "Dear Miss Blackwood, my name is Lady Catherine Pemberton. My brother, Lord William Pemberton, died 3 nights ago under circumstances the police have deemed a tragic accident. I do not believe it was an accident. I believe he was murdered. Inspector Reeves of Carlisle spoke highly of your observational skills and deductive reasoning during the recent railway incident. I am in desperate need of someone with your particular talents. My brother died in his locked study. The doctor says it was heart failure brought on by his chronic illness. But William was in perfect health that evening, animated even, excited. By midnight he was dead. The study door was locked from inside. No one could have entered, yet I am convinced someone killed him. I would be most grateful if you could travel to Pemberton Manor in Cumbria at your earliest convenience. I will, of course, cover all expenses and provide appropriate compensation for your time. The family is gathering this weekend for the reading of William's will. If murder was done, I believe the killer is among us. Please come quickly. I fear I may be next. Yours in desperation, Lady Catherine Pemberton." Margaret set down the letter and stared out her window at the grey Edinburgh morning. Another locked room, another impossible crime, and this time a client who believed she was in danger. She picked up her pen and began composing her reply. March 17th, 1895, late afternoon. The train from Edinburgh deposited Margaret at the small village of Thornfield in Cumbria. A carriage bearing the Pemberton crest waited at the station, driven by a stern-faced coachman who introduced himself only as Davies. They drove for 40 minutes through rolling countryside, passing stone walls and sheep pastures, until the landscape opened to reveal Pemberton Manor. It was magnificent and slightly ominous, a sprawling Georgian mansion of grey stone, 3 stories high, with 2 wings extending from a central block. Mullioned windows caught the dying sunlight. Ancient oaks surrounded the house, their bare branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The carriage pulled up to the main entrance, where a tall woman in black waited on the steps. She was perhaps 55, with iron-grey hair, sharp features, and an air of controlled anxiety. "Miss Blackwood," she said, descending the steps. "Thank heavens you've come. I'm Catherine Pemberton." Margaret took her extended hand. "Lady Pemberton, I came as quickly as I could. Come inside. We'll talk before the others gather for dinner." Catherine glanced at the darkening sky. "This house has too many ears. We must be careful." Inside, the manor was a study in faded grandeur. The entrance hall soared 2 stories high, with a grand staircase splitting into 2 curved arms. Portraits of Pemberton ancestors lined the walls, stern men and elegant women staring down at the present with judgment. Catherine led Margaret through corridors lined with more portraits, past rooms filled with heavy furniture and the musty smell of old wealth, until they reached a small sitting room in the east wing. "This was my mother's room," said Catherine, closing the door. "No one comes here now. We can speak freely." She gestured for Margaret to sit, then began pacing. "My brother William was Lord Pemberton, head of the family, master of this estate. He was 58 years old, unmarried, and until 3 nights ago in excellent health, despite what the doctor claimed." "The doctor said it was heart failure?" asked Margaret, pulling out her notebook. "Dr. Thornbury. He's been the family physician for 30 years. He examined William's body and declared it natural causes, heart failure brought on by chronic heart disease." Catherine's voice was bitter. "Except William had no chronic heart disease. Thornbury is lying, or mistaken, or I don't know, but I know my brother. He was healthy." "Tell me about the night he died." Catherine sat down heavily, hands twisting in her lap. "March 14th. We were all gathered for dinner, the family and a few guests. William was in excellent spirits. He kept saying he had an important announcement to make after dinner. He seemed excited, almost giddy, which was unlike him." "What was the announcement?" "We never found out. After dinner, William retired to his study at approximately 9 o'clock. He said he needed to review some documents before making his announcement. He asked not to be disturbed until 10:30, when he would summon everyone to the drawing room." "And then?" "At 10:30, the butler, Graves, went to fetch William from the study. The door was locked. Graves knocked repeatedly, but there was no answer. We became concerned. My nephew Charles eventually broke down the door." Catherine's voice trembled. "William was slumped over his desk, dead. A glass of brandy sat beside him, half empty. Dr. Thornbury was summoned. He examined William and declared him dead of heart failure." "The door was locked from inside?" "Yes, the key was in the lock on William's side of the door. The windows were latched from inside. There was no other way in or out." "Who else was in the house that night?" Catherine stood and walked to a small writing desk, returning with a handwritten list. "I made this for you. Everyone who was here on the 14th. Margaret studied the list. Family members. Lady Catherine Pemberton, William's sister, age 55. Charles Pemberton, William's nephew, Catherine's son, age 32. Evelyn Pemberton, Charles's wife, age 28. Helena Ashford, William's cousin, age 60. James Ashford, Helena's son, age 35. Guests. Mr. Robert Blackwell, William's solicitor, age 50. Dr. Edmund Thornbury, family physician, age 65. Miss Lydia Hartwell, family friend, age 45. Servants. Graves, butler, age 58. Mrs. Davies, housekeeper, age 52. Davies, coachman, age 55. Martha, parlourmaid, age 24. Thomas, footman, age 26. Margaret looked up. Quite a gathering. Was there a specific reason so many people were here? Catherine hesitated. William had summoned everyone. The solicitor, Mr. Blackwell, arrived 2 days before with documents requiring William's signature. My cousin Helena and her son arrived that same day. William invited Miss Hartwell, though I'm not certain why. And of course, Charles and Evelyn live here. Charles manages the estate. You said you fear you may be next. Why? Because, Catherine's voice dropped to a whisper, because I know something about my brother, a secret from 30 years ago, and I think someone killed him to keep that secret buried. What secret? Before Catherine could answer, a knock sounded at the door, both women startled. Lady Catherine? A male voice, cultured and slightly impatient. Mother, are you in there? Catherine stood quickly. My son, Charles. I'll introduce you. She raised her voice. Come in, Charles. The door opened to reveal a tall, handsome man in his early 30s. He had dark hair, sharp features, and an air of entitled confidence. His eyes narrowed when he saw Margaret. Mother, who is this? Miss Margaret Blackwood. She's a consultant. I've asked her to look into William's death. Charles's expression hardened. A consultant? Mother, Uncle William died of heart failure. Dr. Thornbury confirmed it. The police are satisfied. Why are you bringing strangers into our family affairs? Because I don't believe it was natural causes. That's absurd. Charles turned to Margaret. Miss Blackwood, I apologize for my mother's eccentric behavior. She's grieving and not thinking clearly. Uncle William's death, while tragic, was entirely natural. I must ask you to leave. Margaret remained seated, meeting his gaze calmly. Your mother invited me, Mr. Pemberton. I'll leave when she asks me to, not before. Charles's face flushed with anger. This is my house now. I'm the new Lord Pemberton, and I say— Actually, Catherine interrupted quietly, the will hasn't been read yet. We don't know who inherits. Of course I inherit. I'm Uncle William's nephew and heir apparent. Who else would it be? We'll find out tomorrow at the reading. Until then, Miss Blackwood is my guest. She'll be staying. Charles glared at both of them, then turned on his heel and stalked out, slamming the door. In the silence that followed, Margaret turned to Catherine. He seems very certain he's the heir. Charles has always assumed he would inherit. William had no children, no siblings except me, no close relations except Charles. It seemed obvious. But you're not certain. Catherine's expression was troubled. 3 nights ago, William told me he'd made an important decision about the estate's future. He said he was going to set right an old wrong. That's all he would say. And then he was dead before he could explain. This old wrong, is it related to the secret you mentioned? Yes, but I can't tell you more. Not yet. Not until— She trailed off, looking toward the darkened windows. Lady Catherine, if someone murdered your brother and you believe you're in danger, I need to know everything. I'll tell you, Catherine said, but first you need to meet the others. Observe them. See for yourself. Dinner is in an hour. I'll have Martha show you to your room. As Margaret followed a young maid up the grand staircase to a guest room in the east wing, she reflected on what she'd learned so far. A man dead in a locked study, a family gathering, an unread will, a secret 30 years old, and a nephew who seemed very eager to prevent investigation. Margaret unpacked her small valise and prepared for dinner. This case, she suspected, was going to be complicated. The dining room at Pemberton Manor was designed to impress and intimidate. A table long enough to seat 20 stretched beneath a crystal chandelier. Portraits of Pemberton ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following diners like silent judges. When Margaret entered at 7 o'clock, 9 people were already seated. Catherine had placed Margaret to her right, giving her a clear view of everyone at the table. Allow me to introduce our guest, Catherine said as Margaret took her seat. This is Miss Margaret Blackwood, a consultant I've asked to look into certain matters regarding William's death." The reaction was immediate and varied. Charles, seated at the head of the table in what had presumably been William's place, scowled openly. His wife, Evelyn, a pretty blonde woman with anxious eyes, glanced nervously between her husband and Margaret. An elderly woman in black silk, Helena Ashford, Margaret presumed, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The younger man beside her, presumably her son James, studied Margaret with undisguised curiosity. A portly gentleman with grey whiskers and an expensive suit, Mr. Blackwell, the solicitor, looked uncomfortable. Beside him sat an elderly man with a doctor's bag at his feet, Dr. Thornbury, presumably, who regarded Margaret with distinct hostility. A thin woman in her 40s with sharp features and shrewd eyes, Miss Lydia Hartwell, smiled slightly, as if amused by the entire situation. A consultant? Helena Ashford's voice was cultured but cold. How extraordinary! Consulting on what precisely? "My mother has some absurd notion that William was murdered. She's brought in this woman to investigate, despite the fact that Dr. Thornbury and the police have both confirmed natural causes." "I have not confirmed anything," Dr. Thornbury said stiffly. "I stated that Lord Pemberton died of heart failure, which is medical fact. The cause of that heart failure was his chronic heart condition." "William had no heart condition," Catherine said quietly. "With respect, Lady Catherine, you are not a physician. I treated your brother for 20 years. He had a weak heart." "Then why didn't you ever mention it before? Why was he never prescribed medication? Why was he never advised to avoid exertion?" "I treated him discreetly at his request. William didn't want family fussing over his health." "How convenient," muttered James Ashford, earning a sharp look from his mother. The butler, Graves, served soup with practiced efficiency, his weathered face expressionless. The meal proceeded in tense silence for several minutes. Finally, Mr. Blackwell cleared his throat. "Lady Catherine, while I understand your grief, I must echo Charles's concern. Bringing in an outside investigator after the authorities have closed the case seems irregular." "The authorities?" Catherine's voice rose slightly. The local constable glanced at William's body, listened to Dr. Thornbury, and declared it natural causes. That is hardly a thorough investigation. "What else would you have them do?" Dr. Thornbury demanded. "The door was locked from inside. There were no signs of violence, no evidence of foul play. William's heart simply gave out." "May I ask a question?" Margaret spoke for the first time, her voice calm and clear. All eyes turned to her. "Dr. Thornbury, you said Lord Pemberton had a chronic heart condition. When did you last examine him?" The doctor hesitated. Approximately 6 months ago, a routine examination." "And you found his heart weak at that time?" "Yes, the condition was progressing." "Then it's odd," Margaret continued, "that on the night of his death, Lord Pemberton was described as being in excellent spirits, animated, even excited. Lady Catherine, you said he seemed almost giddy. Does that sound like a man whose heart was failing?" Silence. "People with serious heart conditions," Margaret went on, "typically experience fatigue, shortness of breath, weakness. They don't bound around making excited announcements about important decisions." Dr. Thornbury's face reddened. "Medical matters are complex, Miss Blackwood. I hardly think a school teacher is qualified to—" "I'm not making a medical diagnosis. I'm simply observing that the physical evidence doesn't align with your conclusion. A dying man doesn't behave like a healthy one." Unless, Lydia Hartwell spoke up, her voice dry and amused, unless he was dying and didn't know it yet. Some poisons mimic heart failure quite convincingly. The room went very still. Poison? Charles's voice was sharp. That's ridiculous. Who would poison Uncle William? Who, indeed? Lydia smiled faintly. Someone who stood to gain from his death, perhaps? Are you accusing me? Charles half rose from his chair. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm merely observing that Miss Blackwood raises valid questions, and Dr. Thornberry seems unusually defensive. I am not defensive. I am trying to prevent wild speculation from tarnishing a good man's memory. A good man, Helena Ashford murmured. Yes, William was that, among other things. Something in her tone made Margaret look at her sharply. Helena's face was carefully neutral, but her eyes held something else. Bitterness? Resentment? What do you mean by that, Mother? James Ashford asked. Nothing, dear. Merely that your Uncle William was a complex man, aren't we all? The rest of the dinner passed in uncomfortable silence, broken only by the clink of silverware and murmured requests to pass the salt. Margaret observed each person carefully. Charles Pemberton, angry, defensive, eager to shut down investigation, stood to inherit everything, clear motive. Evelyn Pemberton, anxious, quiet, deferring to her husband, kept glancing at the empty chair at the head of the table where William had presumably sat. Helena Ashford, cold, bitter about something, her comment about William being complex suggested old resentments. James Ashford, observant, intelligent, somewhat amused by the family drama, watching everyone carefully. Mr. Blackwell, solicitor, uncomfortable, clearly wanted to avoid controversy, kept checking his pocket watch as if eager to leave. Dr. Thornberry, hostile to investigation, insistent on natural causes, overly defensive about his diagnosis. Lydia Hartwell, sharp, observant, seemingly amused. Why was she here? What was her connection to William? When coffee was served in the drawing room after dinner, Margaret found herself beside Lydia Hartwell by the fire. "You're wondering why I'm here," Lydia said quietly. "Among other things. William and I were friends, old friends. He invited me here for the announcement he never got to make." She sipped her coffee. "I think you're right, by the way, about the poison." "What makes you say that?" "Because I saw William shortly before he died. He was in the library at 8:30, taking a book down from the shelf. He seemed perfectly healthy, more energetic than I'd seen him in years. 90 minutes later, he was dead." Lydia's eyes were shrewd. "That's not heart failure. That's something acute. Did you tell this to the constable?" The constable didn't ask. He took one look at Dr. Thornberry's confident diagnosis and closed the case. "Why didn't you insist?" "Because, Miss Blackwood, I'm a single woman of modest means, living in a world that doesn't value my opinions. If I'd insisted William was murdered, I'd have been dismissed as hysterical. But you, Miss Blackwood, you might actually be listened to. That's why Catherine was smart to bring you here. Do you know what William's announcement was going to be?" "No, but I can tell you this. He was nervous about it. Excited, yes, but also anxious. He said he was going to set the record straight about something that happened long ago." "How long ago?" 30 years, he said, before I knew the family well." Lydia set down her coffee cup. "Miss Blackwood, there are secrets in this house, old secrets, and someone doesn't want them exposed." Before Margaret could ask more, Charles Pemberton appeared. "Miss Blackwood, a word." Margaret excused herself and followed Charles into the library. a magnificent room lined floor to ceiling with books. Charles closed the door and turned to face her. "I want you to leave," he said bluntly. "Your mother invited me. My mother is grieving and grasping at shadows. Uncle William died of natural causes. This investigation is disturbing the family and dishonoring his memory." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Margaret said calmly. "If he died naturally, my investigation will confirm it. And if you go around suggesting poison and murder, if you create scandal, then perhaps there's something to find." Charles stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening tone. "Leave, Miss Blackwood, or you may find Pemberton Manor is not a healthy place for women who ask too many questions." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice. Good evening." He left Margaret alone in the library. She stood for a moment, processing the conversation, then noticed something. The library had a door connecting to another room. She tried it, locked, but through the keyhole she could see another door on the far side. William's study, the locked room where he died. Margaret tried the handle, locked as expected, but tomorrow she would find a way inside, because if William Pemberton was murdered, the answer was in that room, and someone in this house was desperate to keep her from finding it. March 18th, 1895, morning. Margaret woke early, dressed quickly, and went downstairs before the family gathered for breakfast. She found Graves, the butler, arranging flowers in the entrance hall. "Good morning, Mr. Graves." The old man turned, his face carefully neutral. "Good morning, miss. Breakfast won't be served until 8. "I'm not looking for breakfast. I'd like to see Lord Pemberton's study." Graves's expression didn't change. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Mr. Charles has ordered the room kept locked until after the will reading." "I see. Mr. Graves, you were the one who found Lord Pemberton dead, weren't you?" A flicker of emotion crossed the butler's face, grief quickly suppressed. "Yes, miss. I served Lord William for 35 years. "I'm sorry for your loss. Mr. Graves, did you notice anything unusual that evening before Lord Pemberton went to his study?" The butler hesitated, then glanced around to ensure they were alone. "There was one thing, miss. When I served brandy after dinner, Lord William seemed distracted. He kept looking at Mr. Blackwell, the solicitor, and once, when Mr. Blackwell left the room briefly, Lord William picked up some papers from the side table and looked at them with a very strange expression." "What kind of expression?" "Angry, miss, and perhaps frightened. I've never seen Lord William frightened before." "Do you know what the papers were?" "No, miss, but Mr. Blackwell had been working in the study with Lord William for 2 days prior, documents of some sort." Before Margaret could ask more, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Catherine descended, followed by her son Charles. "Miss Blackwood," Catherine said, "did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you. I was just asking Mr. Graves about the study." "The study remains locked," Charles said firmly. "The solicitor has the only key, and he won't open it until after the will reading this afternoon." "When will that be?" 2 o'clock, in the drawing room. Mr. Blackwell insists all family members must be present." Charles's tone was irritated, an absurd formality given that the contents are obvious. "Are they?" Margaret asked mildly. "Of course. I'm the heir, the estate, the title, everything passes to me." "Then you have nothing to worry about," Margaret said, echoing her words from the previous night. Charles's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, other family members began descending for breakfast. Margaret spent the morning observing the household. She walked the grounds, noting the layout of the house, the placement of windows, potential entry and exit points. The study was on the ground floor in the west wing, with windows overlooking the garden. But those windows, she learned from asking the gardener, had been latched from inside when William's body was found. Another locked room, another impossible crime. At lunch, tension crackled through the dining room. Everyone knew the will reading was approaching. Everyone had theories about what it contained.
"Uncle William always favoured Charles," Helena Ashford said, picking at her food. "Though heaven knows why. Charles has managed the estate competently enough, but he lacks William's vision." "Mother, please," James murmured. "It's true. William built this estate into something significant. Charles simply maintains it." "I do more than maintain it," Charles snapped. "I've increased revenues by 30% in the past 5 years. "By raising tenant rents and cutting costs," Helena replied. "William would have been appalled." "William's management style was outdated." "Enough," Catherine interrupted. "We'll know soon enough what William decided." But Margaret noticed something interesting. Helena herself looked anxious, as if she wasn't certain what the will contained, as if she feared something. At 2 o'clock, everyone gathered in the drawing room. Mr. Blackwell, the solicitor, sat at a small table with a sealed envelope before him. His face was grave. "Before I begin, I must explain that this will was signed only 3 days ago, on March 14th, at approximately 6 o'clock in the evening, mere hours before Lord Pemberton's death. It supersedes all previous wills." Charles went pale. 3 days ago, but Uncle William never mentioned— "He asked me to prepare new documents," Blackwell continued. "I arrived 2 days prior with drafts. We reviewed them, made revisions, and he signed the final version that evening. This is his last will and testament." The room was utterly silent. Blackwell broke the seal and began to read. Mr. Blackwell adjusted his spectacles and began reading in a formal tone. "I, William Henry Pemberton, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make this my last will and testament." The standard opening statements followed: revocation of previous wills, appointment of executors, payment of debts. Then Blackwell reached the critical section. "To my sister, Catherine Pemberton, I leave the sum of £50,000 and the use of the east wing of Pemberton Manor for her lifetime." Catherine gasped softly. £50,000 was a fortune. "To my cousin, Helena Ashford, I leave the sum of £20,000 in recognition of old debts long unpaid." Helena's face went white. "Old debts?" she whispered. Blackwell continued. "To my nephew, Charles Pemberton, I leave the sum of £10,000 and thank him for his service in managing the estate. However, I cannot in good conscience leave Pemberton Manor in his hands, as he lacks the moral character I believe essential for the stewardship of this family's legacy." Charles shot to his feet. "What?" "Please sit down, Mr. Pemberton," said Blackwell firmly. "I must finish reading." Charles sank back into his chair, his face crimson with fury. His wife Evelyn looked ready to faint. "The remainder of my estate, including Pemberton Manor, its lands, investments and associated income, estimated total value of approximately £400,000, I leave to my son, Thomas William Pemberton, currently residing at Ashwood Cottage in the village of Thornfield."
complete silence. Then everyone spoke at once. "His son?" Charles shouted. "Uncle William had no son." "This is impossible," Helena cried. "Thomas Pemberton," Catherine's voice shook. "William, what did you do?" Only Lydia Hartwell remained silent, watching everyone with those shrewd eyes.
Mr. Blackwell raised his hand for silence. "There is more. Lord Pemberton included an explanatory letter to be read with the will." He pulled out a second sheet of paper and began to read in William's own words. "To my family, I owe an explanation and an apology. 30 years ago, in 1865, I fell in love with a young woman named Sarah Miller. She was the daughter of our head gardener, far below my station according to society's rules, but I loved her and she loved me. We married in secret in January of 1865. She became pregnant. We planned to announce our marriage after the child was born, consequences be damned. But Sarah died in childbirth in October of 1865. The baby, a son, survived. Devastated by grief and pressured by my father, I made a terrible decision. I gave the child to a tenant farmer and his wife to raise, providing money for his care, but never acknowledging him as my son. I told myself it was for the best. The child would have a normal life, free from scandal. But the truth is, I was a coward. I chose my family's reputation over my own son. Thomas grew up believing he was the natural son of the farmer who raised him. He never knew the truth about his parentage. But I've watched him from afar all these years. He's a good man, honest, hard-working, kind. Everything I should have taught him myself. 3 months ago, I finally told Thomas the truth. He was shocked, angry, but eventually agreed to meet me. We've been developing a relationship since then. Now, at the end of my life, I want to set things right. Thomas is my legitimate son and heir. He deserves what should have been his all along. To Charles, I'm sorry. You've been a capable manager, but you've also been cruel to tenants and dismissive of those you consider beneath you. Thomas will treat the estate and its people with the respect they deserve. To Catherine, you knew about Sarah. You kept my secret all these years. Thank you. I hope you'll welcome Thomas into the family. To Helena, you also knew. I'm sorry I couldn't help you more when you needed it. The £20,000 is my attempt to make amends for old wrongs. This is my final act as Lord Pemberton, acknowledging my son and giving him his birthright. William Pemberton, March 14th, 1895. Blackwell set down the letter. The drawing-room erupted. Charles was on his feet, face purple with rage. "This is absurd, fraudulent. There's no proof this Thomas is actually William's son." "There is documentation," Blackwell said calmly. "Marriage certificate, birth certificate. DNA testing wasn't available in 1865, but Lord Pemberton kept detailed records. Records can be forged. By whom? Your uncle himself." Blackwell's voice was firm. "This will is legal and valid. Thomas Pemberton is the rightful heir. I'll contest it. I'll take this to court." "You may certainly try, but I assure you the will is unassailable." Helena Ashford spoke up, her voice shaking. "Catherine, did you know about this?" Catherine nodded slowly. "I knew about Sarah. William swore me to secrecy, but I didn't know about Thomas until last week when William told me he was changing his will." "And you said nothing?"
Charles whirled on his mother. "You let him disinherit me and said nothing? It wasn't my secret to tell. You betrayed me, your own son. Charles, please." But Charles stormed out, slamming the door. Evelyn hurried after him, crying. In the chaos, Margaret noticed something. James Ashford sat very still, his face pale, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. And Dr. Thornberry had gone grey as ash. Margaret stood quietly and slipped out of the drawing room. She found Graves in the hallway. "Mr. Graves, I need to see the study, now." But Mr. Charles said, "Mr. Charles has just been disinherited. I don't think his orders carry much weight anymore. Please." Graves hesitated, then nodded. "Mr. Blackwell has the key. Wait here." He returned moments later with Blackwell, who looked exhausted. "Miss Blackwood wants to see the study," Graves said. Blackwell studied Margaret. "You think William was murdered because of the will?" "Yes, I think someone knew what was in the will and didn't want it read." "Then, by all means, let's see if your theory holds water." He led them to the study door and unlocked it.
William Pemberton's study was exactly what Margaret expected from a wealthy aristocrat, masculine, elegant, and imposing. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls. A massive mahogany desk dominated the room. Leather chairs faced a fireplace. The windows overlooked the garden, currently dark with evening shadows. And on the desk, exactly as he'd been found, sat a glass with a small amount of amber liquid in the bottom. Margaret walked carefully around the room, observing everything. The door had indeed been locked from inside. The key was still in the lock on this side. The windows were latched from within. No secret passages, no hidden doors. Just like the Midnight Express case, this appeared to be an impossible crime. "Mr. Blackwell, show me exactly how Lord Pemberton was positioned when he was found." Blackwell demonstrated, slumped forward over the desk, head on his arms, the glass within reach. "And this glass, has it been moved?" "No, we left everything as it was, at the constable's direction." Margaret bent to examine the glass without touching it. A faint residue remained at the bottom. She sniffed carefully. Brandy, and something else, something bitter. "Mr. Blackwell, was Lord Pemberton in the habit of drinking brandy?" "Yes, he took a glass after dinner most evenings." "Where did the brandy come from?" "There's a decanter on the sideboard. Graves would have filled it before dinner." Margaret examined the decanter, nearly full, with crystal glasses beside it. She walked to the desk and studied the papers scattered across its surface. Legal documents, the new will in draft form, and something else, a leather journal open to the final page. Margaret read William's last entry, dated March 14th at 8:45 p.m. "It's done. I've signed the new will. Tomorrow I'll tell the family. They'll be shocked, perhaps angry, but it's the right thing to do. Thomas deserves his inheritance. I know some of them won't accept it easily. Charles will be furious. He's counted on inheriting for so long, but Charles has shown his true character in how he treats people beneath his station. Thomas will be a better lord than Charles could ever be. I'm nervous about Helena's reaction. She knows the truth about Sarah, knows I kept the secret all these years. Will she forgive me? Will Catherine? But this is my chance to redeem myself, to finally acknowledge my son. Sarah, wherever you are, I hope you can forgive me for waiting so long."
That was the last entry. William had written it less than an hour before his death. Margaret turned to Graves, who'd been standing silently by the door. "Mr. Graves, who brought Lord Pemberton his brandy that evening?" "I did, miss. I served brandy to all the gentlemen in the drawing-room after dinner. Lord William took his glass to the study when he retired at 9 o'clock. So, the brandy was poured in the drawing-room, where everyone could see it. Yes, miss. And Lord Pemberton carried it himself to the study. Yes, miss. Who had access to the study between 9 o'clock and when he was found at 10:30? Graves thought carefully. No one, miss. Lord William specifically asked not to be disturbed. The study door was closed. I was in and out of the dining room and drawing room all evening, serving coffee and attending to guests. I would have seen if anyone approached the study. What about the windows? Latched from inside, miss, as you see. Margaret walked to the windows and examined them carefully. Old brass latches, stiff with age, no sign of tampering, and the ground outside showed no footprints. It had rained the day before, and the soil was soft. If someone had approached from outside, there would be tracks. She turned back to the room, frustrated. How had someone poisoned William's brandy in a locked room? Unless... Mr. Blackwell, where were you when the brandy was served? In the drawing room with everyone else. Why? Just establishing everyone's locations. Margaret turned to Graves. And Dr. Thornbury? In the drawing room as well, miss. What about Helena Ashford and her son James? Mrs. Ashford was in the drawing room. Mr. James stepped out briefly, perhaps 10 minutes before Lord William retired to the study. Where did he go? To the library, I believe. He wanted to find a particular book. The library, which connected to the study. Mr. Graves, is there a connecting door between the library and this study? Yes, miss, but it was locked that night. Lord William always kept it locked when he wanted privacy. Locked from which side? From the study side, miss. Margaret walked to the connecting door and examined it. Old, heavy wood, a keyhole on this side, but no key in it. Where is the key to this door? Lord William kept it in his desk drawer, miss. Margaret opened the drawer. Inside was a single brass key. She took it out and tried it in the lock. It turned smoothly. She opened the door. Beyond was the library, dark now, but she could see the shelves of books, the reading chairs, the door to the corridor. Mr. Graves, was this connecting door locked when Lord Pemberton's body was found? Yes, miss. Mr. Charles checked it specifically. And the key was in the desk drawer? Yes, miss. So the connecting door was locked from the study side with the key inside the desk. The windows were latched from inside. The main door was locked from inside with the key in the lock. Impossible. Unless... Margaret turned to Blackwell. May I examine the will documents more closely? Of course. She studied the papers on the desk, the will itself, signed and witnessed, various supporting documents, and something else, a folded piece of paper tucked under the corner of the blotter. Margaret pulled it out and unfolded it. It was a letter addressed to William, dated March 12th, 2 days before his death. The handwriting was educated, but shaky, as if the writer had been upset. William, you cannot do this. You cannot disinherit Charles for that bastard child. I won't allow it. The scandal will destroy everything our family has built. I'm begging you, reconsider. Don't read the will. Burn it. Pretend Thomas doesn't exist, as you've done for 30 years. If you go through with this, there will be consequences. I'm warning you. You know what I'm capable of. No signature. Margaret looked up. Mr. Blackwell, did you see this letter before? No, William never mentioned it. Do you recognize the handwriting? Blackwell studied it. Possibly, but I can't be certain. Margaret folded the letter carefully. This is a threat. Someone was trying to prevent the will from being read. By killing William? Blackwell looked skeptical. That seems extreme. Perhaps they thought with William dead, the new will would be invalid. Perhaps they didn't know it had already been signed. But the letter is dated March 12th. The will was signed March 14th. The writer would have known. Unless, Margaret said slowly, the writer didn't expect William to go through with it. They sent this threat thinking it would make him reconsider. When he signed the will anyway, she trailed off thinking. Graves cleared his throat. Miss Blackwood, dinner is being served shortly. Should I inform Lady Catherine you'll be attending? Yes, thank you. I'll be along shortly. After Graves and Blackwell left, Margaret remained in the study, thinking through the puzzle. Someone had poisoned William's brandy, but how, when the brandy was poured in front of witnesses, and William himself carried it to a locked study? The answer came to her slowly, piece by piece, and when it did, she realized the murder was both simpler and more clever than she'd thought. March 18th, 1995, evening. Margaret didn't attend dinner. Instead, she spent the evening walking the grounds, thinking through the evidence, testing her theory from every angle. By 9 o'clock, she was certain. She found Catherine in her sitting room. Lady Catherine, I need you to gather everyone in the drawing room, everyone who was here the night Lord Pemberton died. Catherine looked up from her embroidery. You've solved it? I believe so, but I need to be certain. Please, gather everyone. 20 minutes later, the drawing room was filled. Charles sat with his arms crossed, glaring at everyone. Evelyn perched beside him, looking terrified. Helena and James Ashford occupied the sofa. Dr. Thornbury stood by the fireplace, looking defensive. Mr. Blackwell sat near the door. Lydia Hartwell had taken a chair by the window. Catherine sat closest to Margaret, and standing nervously near the back was a young man Margaret hadn't seen before, perhaps 30, with dark hair and William's eyes. Thomas Pemberton, presumably, summoned by Blackwell. Miss Blackwood, Charles said coldly, my mother says you have something to tell us. Let's hear it so we can all get on with our evening. Margaret stood before the fireplace, looking at each person in turn. 3 nights ago, Lord William Pemberton died in his locked study. The death was ruled natural causes, heart failure brought on by chronic heart disease. But I don't believe Lord Pemberton had a heart condition. I believe he was murdered. We've been through this, Dr. Thornbury snapped. William had a weak heart. I treated him for years. You claimed to treat him, but Lady Catherine says he never showed symptoms of heart disease. He never showed symptoms of heart disease. He was active, healthy, energetic right up until the night he died. Medical conditions can be asymptomatic, not to the point where a man in heart failure is bounding around making excited announcements. Dr. Thornbury, you lied about Lord Pemberton's medical condition. The question is, why? The doctor's face went purple. How dare you? Let her speak, Catherine said quietly. Margaret continued. The night Lord Pemberton died, he'd just signed a new will that would disinherit Charles and leave everything to his newly acknowledged son, Thomas. Someone in this room didn't want that will to take effect. Obviously, I'd have reason to kill him, except I didn't know about the will until this afternoon. Didn't you? Margaret pulled out the threatening letter from her pocket. Someone sent this letter to Lord Pemberton 2 days before his death. A threat. Don't read the will or there will be consequences. This person knew about Thomas, knew about the will, and wanted to stop it. She held up the letter. The handwriting is educated, careful, but shaky with emotion. Who here writes like this? Silence. I compared this handwriting to various documents I found in Lord Pemberton's desk. business correspondence, personal letters, and I found a match. Margaret walked to stand before Helena Ashford. Mrs. Ashford, this is your handwriting. Helena went rigid. James, beside her, gasped. Mother, you wrote that? Helena's voice shook. I wrote a letter, yes, but I didn't kill anyone. I was trying to protect the family. From what? Margaret asked gently. From scandal, from the revelation that William had married a servant and hidden a bastard child for 30 years. Do you know what that would do to the Pemberton name? Thomas wasn't a bastard, Catherine said quietly. William married his mother. The child was legitimate. A secret marriage to a gardener's daughter? That's almost worse. Helena turned to William's son. Thomas, I'm sorry, but you must understand, your existence threatens everything. The scandal, the gossip, the damage to the family reputation. So you killed my father to prevent it? Thomas's voice was quiet but intense. I didn't kill anyone, Helena cried. I wrote that letter to try to make William see reason, but he ignored me. He signed the will anyway. I didn't kill him. No, Margaret agreed. You didn't, but you knew someone else might. That's why you wrote the letter, not just as a threat, but as a warning. You knew someone else in this house had even more to lose than you did. She turned to Charles. Charles Pemberton, you've managed this estate for years, believing you were the heir. Your entire future depended on inheriting. When you learned about Thomas, you knew everything you'd worked for would vanish, so you decided to stop it. Charles shot to his feet. I didn't know about Thomas until today. I didn't know about the will until Blackwell read it. Didn't you? Margaret walked to Charles, looking up at him steadily. The night Lord Pemberton died, you broke down the study door. You were first into the room. You saw your uncle dead, saw the glass of brandy, saw the will documents on his desk. You knew immediately what had happened, that he disinherited you for a son you never knew existed. I didn't know. And yet, Margaret continued, you were the one who insisted most strongly that it was natural causes. You pushed Dr. Thornbury to declare heart failure. You prevented a proper investigation. You wanted the will reading delayed. Why? Because you needed time to find a way to contest it. That's not. I didn't. Charles was sweating now. But you didn't kill him, Margaret said, because you're not subtle enough. This murder required planning, patience, and a detailed knowledge of poisons. You have none of those qualities. Charles sank back into his chair, looking oddly relieved to be eliminated as a suspect, even if he'd just been thoroughly insulted. Margaret turned to Dr. Thornbury. Dr. Thornbury, you were the one who examined the body and declared natural causes. You were adamant about the heart condition. You prevented any further investigation. Why? Because it was natural causes. Was it? Or did you lie about the autopsy results because you knew the truth would expose the killer and you couldn't allow that? The room went very still. Who are you protecting, Doctor? Margaret asked quietly. Dr. Thornbury said nothing, but his eyes flickered briefly toward one corner of the room. Margaret followed his gaze. To Lydia Hartwell. Lydia Hartwell smiled slightly. Oh dear, I was wondering when you'd work it out. Everyone turned to stare at her. Lydia! Catherine's voice was shocked. No, you couldn't have. Couldn't I? Lydia stood gracefully and walked to stand by the fireplace beside Margaret. "I had the knowledge. I studied chemistry before becoming a governess, did you know that? I had the opportunity. I was here that night. And I had the motive." "What motive?" Thomas demanded. "You barely knew my father." "On the contrary," Lydia said, "I knew him very well. You see, Sarah Miller, your mother, was my sister." The room erupted in gasps. "Your sister?" Helena whispered. "Yes, Sarah was my younger sister, beautiful, kind, and so desperately in love with William Pemberton. When she told me she'd married him in secret, I was thrilled for her. When she told me she was pregnant, I was overjoyed. Finally, my sister would have the life she deserved." Lydia's voice hardened. "But then she died in childbirth at 19 years old, terrified and alone, because William wouldn't acknowledge her publicly. And William, the coward, gave away their baby and pretended none of it ever happened." "He was grieving," Catherine said. "He made a mistake." "He was a coward," Lydia repeated. "For 30 years he let his son believe he was nobody. For 30 years he lived in luxury while Thomas grew up with tenant farmers. And then, when William was old and dying and wanted to ease his conscience, he suddenly decided to do the right thing." She turned to Thomas. "Don't misunderstand. I'm glad William finally acknowledged you. You deserve your inheritance. But William didn't deserve forgiveness. He didn't deserve a peaceful death. He deserved to know what he'd done." "So you killed him," Margaret said. "Yes." Lydia's voice was calm, almost serene. "I killed him, and I'm not sorry." "How?" James Ashford asked, fascinated despite himself. "The locked room. How did you do it?" Lydia smiled. It was quite simple, really. The key was understanding that William didn't need to die in the study at all. He only needed to be found there. Margaret nodded. "You poisoned him earlier, before he went to the study." "Exactly. At dinner, I sat beside William. I complimented his brandy, said I'd never tasted anything so fine. He offered to let me try a sip from his glass. While everyone was distracted by the soup course, I added a small amount of aconitine to his brandy." "Aconitine?" Mr. Blackwell asked. "Monkshood poison," Dr. Thornbury said quietly. "Highly toxic. Mimics heart failure." "Precisely," Lydia said. "William drank his poisoned brandy throughout dinner. By the time he retired to his study at 9 o'clock, the poison was already dead." "He carried the poisoned glass to his study," Margaret said, piecing it together. "He locked the door, intending to review his documents before making his announcement, but the poison took effect. His heart began to fail. By 10:30, when Graves knocked on the door, William was already dead." "A perfect locked room murder," Lydia agreed, "because the poison was administered outside the locked room. By the time William was inside alone, the deed was already done." "But why?" Thomas's voice broke. "Why kill him now, after 30 years? Why not let him try to make amends?" "Because amends aren't possible for some crimes. William let my sister die alone and terrified. He abandoned their child. He lived a comfort while Thomas worked in fields. Acknowledging you in his will doesn't erase 30 years of cowardice." "So you took his life," Margaret said. "I ended his suffering," Lydia corrected. "William was guilt-ridden, anxious, afraid of how the family would react. I gave him peace. You gave him death. Sometimes they're the same thing." Catherine stood slowly. "Lydia, did William know? Did he realize you were Sarah's sister?" "Not until the end. I told him just before dinner. I wanted him to know who I was, wanted him to understand why this was happening. He looked at me with such horror, but I think, deep down, he knew he deserved it. No one deserves murder, Margaret said firmly. Perhaps not, but some people deserve justice, and since the law wouldn't provide it, I did.
Dr. Thornbury stepped forward. I suspected, he said quietly. When I examined William's body, I recognized signs of aconitine poisoning. But I also knew that if I declared it murder, the investigation would destroy the family. I thought it was best to call it natural causes and let sleeping dogs lie. You helped cover up a murder, Margaret said. I helped prevent a scandal, Thornbury replied. William was already dead. Nothing could change that, but I could spare the family from more pain. Instead, you let a murderer walk free. Did I? The old doctor looked at Lydia. She's confessed now, hasn't she? Perhaps I simply delayed the inevitable. Silence fell over the drawing room. Finally, Thomas spoke. Miss Hartwell, my mother, Sarah, what was she like? Lydia's hard expression softened. She was wonderful, kind, gentle, full of laughter. She loved your father desperately. She would have been so proud of you. Did she suffer when she died? No, Lydia lied gently. It was quick. She held you once, named you Thomas after her father, and then she was gone. Thomas nodded, tears in his eyes. Margaret walked to the bell pull and rang for Graves. When the butler appeared, she said, "Please send someone to fetch the constable. Tell him we have a confession in the Lord Pemberton case." Lydia didn't resist as Graves left to follow her instructions. She simply sat back down in her chair, looking almost peaceful. "Thank you, Miss Blackwood, for seeing the truth, for not letting them bury it as natural causes. I only found the truth. I can't say whether justice will be served. Justice was served 3 nights ago in that study. This is just the reckoning." The constable arrived an hour later. Lydia Hartwell confessed again, calmly and completely. She was taken into custody, charged with murder. Dr. Thornbury faced charges as well for falsifying cause of death and obstructing justice. The family was left to pick up the pieces. Margaret stayed one more night at Pemberton Manor. In the morning, she found Catherine in the garden, staring at a particular plot of ground beneath an old oak tree. "This is where Sarah is buried," Catherine said quietly. "We gave her a proper funeral, at least. William insisted on that much, but we couldn't put her name on the stone, couldn't acknowledge who she really was. The scandal, you know." She gestured to a simple marker, "Beloved friend, 1846 to 1865. "Will you change it now?" Margaret asked. "Thomas wants to. Sarah Miller Pemberton, beloved wife and mother. She deserves that recognition." She paused. "Do you think Lydia was right, that William deserved to die?" Margaret considered carefully. "I think William did a terrible thing 30 years ago. Abandoning his child was unforgivable, but I also think he was trying, at the end, to make it right. He acknowledged Thomas. He gave him his inheritance. He was prepared to face scandal and family anger to do the right thing. Too little, too late? Perhaps, but it's more than many men would do. He could have taken his secret to the grave. Instead, he chose to face it. And Lydia killed him for that choice. Lydia killed him for what he did 30 years ago. The recent changes didn't matter to her.
In her mind, no amount of repentance could erase the original sin. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "Do you believe in redemption, Miss Blackwood?" "I believe people can try to change. Whether they succeed, that's between them and their conscience." They walked back toward the house. At the door, Catherine turned. "What will you do now?" Margaret smiled slightly. "Return to Edinburgh, back to teaching Latin to bored schoolboys." "But you're so good at this, at seeing truth others miss." "I'm a teacher who occasionally solves murders, that's all." "Is it?" Margaret looked at her shrewdly. "I think you've found your calling, Miss Blackwood, whether you want to admit it or not." Margaret left Pemberton Manor that afternoon. As the carriage carried her away, she looked back at the grey stone mansion, thinking about secrets and lies, justice and revenge. Thomas Pemberton would be the new Lord Pemberton. He seemed like a good man, honest, kind, overwhelmed by his sudden elevation, but determined to do right by the estate and its people. He would be better than Charles, certainly. Charles had left the manor in a fury, taking Evelyn with him. £10,000 was nothing compared to what he'd expected to inherit, but it was enough to start over somewhere else. Perhaps away from the shadow of Pemberton Manor, he might become a better man. Margaret doubted it, but she supposed anything was possible. Helena and James Ashford had departed that morning, Helena counting her £20,000 and muttering about old debts finally paid. Margaret never did learn what those debts were. Some family secrets, it seemed, would remain buried.
And Lydia Hartwell was in custody, awaiting trial. She would likely hang for murder. Part of Margaret felt that was justice. Part of her felt that Lydia had done what she believed was right, in her own twisted way. Justice, Margaret reflected, was rarely simple. The train back to Edinburgh gave her time to think. 2 cases now, the Midnight Express and Pemberton Manor, both locked-room mysteries, both involving secrets from the past, both requiring careful observation and logical deduction. Catherine was right. Margaret had found her calling. She just wasn't sure she wanted it. Teaching was safe, predictable, comfortable. Murder investigations were dangerous, emotionally draining, and morally complicated. But they were also fascinating. Margaret pulled out her notebook and began writing up her notes on the Pemberton case, organized observations, clear deductions, the step-by-step logic that had led her to the truth. Perhaps she could write up both cases, the train and the manor, detective stories, in the style of Edgar Allan Poe or Wilkie Collins. Perhaps someone would publish them. Perhaps they might even be popular. The idea made her smile. Margaret Blackwood, schoolteacher and detective. It had a certain ring to it. She was still smiling when the train pulled into Edinburgh Waverley Station. 1 week later, Margaret received a letter from an unexpected source. "Dear Miss Blackwood, my name is Inspector Edmund Garrett of Scotland Yard. Inspector Reeves of Carlisle and Lady Catherine Pemberton have both spoken highly of your investigative abilities. I am writing regarding a case that has stymied our best detectives. 3 women have been found dead in locked rooms across London over the past 6 months. The deaths appear unrelated, different victims, different locations, different methods. But I believe there's a pattern we're missing. Would you be willing to consult on this case? We would of course compensate you appropriately for your time and expertise. Your unique perspective might be exactly what we need. Yours sincerely, Inspector Edmund Garrett, Scotland Yard." Margaret set down the letter and looked out her window at the Edinburgh skyline. 3 locked rooms, 3 dead women.
a pattern no one could see. She should refuse. She should stay here, teaching, living her quiet life. But even as she thought it, Margaret was reaching for her pen to write her acceptance. The game, as they said, was afoot. The end. Margaret Blackwood will return in The Locked Room Murders of London.